Hi everyone, and welcome to Being a Changemaker, Making a Difference. This is an event to launch the Changemakers Guide from the Open University for UK Parliament Week 2021. This event is open to members of the public, held as part of UK Parliament Week, which officially runs all of this week with further activities across November. I'm Donna Smith. I'm a politics academic at the Open University, and I lead the university's partnership with Parliament, and I'm the host of this evening's webinar. I'd like to introduce Annie Waddington from UK Parliament, OU politics student Lilybell Evergreen, and Rachel Farrington from Voting Counts, who are also helping with the webinar. I'll introduce them properly later, and they can say a bit about who they are, but thank you to them for helping out today. Before we start, a little bit of the boring stuff, the housekeeping, just to say your mics and videos are off, just to help us with the streaming, because there's quite a lot of people here. The only people on screen are the people making up the actual presentation and the discussion, but you do have access to the chat box, and there are opportunities to ask questions. So please do pop them in the chat box, and my colleague Amy will collect them and forward them to us later. Please try and keep the discussion on topic. I'm sure it'll all be fine, but if any problems arise, just let us know. If you require live captions, you can select that from the bar at the top. So just press the 3 dots and then turn on live captions. You can also get a fuller screen and get larger slides by pressing full screen. We are recording the webinar, as mentioned in the Eventbrite invite, and we might take a few screenshots of the event to use online, and we'll send you a survey after this event to get your feedback. So hopefully that's all the stuff you need to know what's happening tonight. Okay, so what we're here today to talk about, as I said, it's UK Parliament Week this week, an annual event that engages people from across the UK with the UK Parliament. We're a partner of UK Parliament and Parliament more generally, and as part of this we've created Changemakers, a guide to making political and social change. So the aim of this guide is to encourage people to engage with the UK Parliament in particular, but also politics more generally, giving people the essential knowledge and tools they need to make change. So building on the Changemakers Guide, this webinar will hopefully give you some background on how to make change, how you can engage with the UK Parliament to make change, and how you can utilise the guide. So as it says on the slide, we want to find out more about Changemakers as the main launch event, give you some background information about UK Parliament Week, some more information on UK Parliament's role as a change maker, and how you can make political and social change. So we hope this guide will be helpful just generally to people who want to know more, but also I'm sure many of you are teachers, academics, educators, so it would be helpful and of use to people with their students, community groups, as well as more generally. And also it's, I think, useful for people of all ages. We are focusing, I think, on higher education, but also it's useful for college students, school students, and the general public overall. So that's what we're here to talk about today. So we'll start off by just having a bit of information about UK Parliament Week, and I'm going to bring in Annie Waddington here from UK Parliament to talk a little bit more about that. Annie?
Thanks, Donna. Hi, everyone. Happy Parliament Week, UK Parliament Week. I say that it is this week. It runs from the 1st until the 7th of November. Just before I tell you about the week itself, I just want to give you a little bit of context, just in case you're not aware of that. In UK Parliament, there is what's called a participation team. It consists of around about 270 people, and we are responsible for engaging people from around the UK with the work of UK Parliament, trying to help people better understand what happens there, who works there, and more importantly, how everyone in the UK can access UK Parliament, and that it is for them. They can change what happens there, they can get involved in what happens there, and they can influence what happens there in different ways. And I will be talking a little bit more about that later on. I work specifically in a team that delivers public engagement projects, and we're very outward looking. Our biggest campaign of the year is UK Parliament Week. UK Parliament Week has been running for 10 years. In its initial year, I think we had about 4,000 people take part, but it's grown over the years. It's becoming increasingly popular, and today we now know that there are over 1 million people participating in UK Parliament Week this year. Well, what do people do? What do people do for Parliament Week? Well, we invite people to sign up. They get a free kit in the post, and I should say it's not too late to sign up. You can still sign up online. You can still get a kit, and there are lots of online resources that will help you better understand Parliament, what happens there, how you can get involved, and also some fun activities depending on what age you are. And it is open to people of all ages. I think a lot of people think that a lot of what we do is just for young people or for youth groups, but actually Parliament Week is for everyone, of course. People sign up, they get their free kit in the post, which has an activity booklet and lots of goodies like stickers and bunting, and some ideas about the types of activities that people can do during Parliament Week. And we intend the week to be the start of a conversation about what Parliament is and what it means to everyone. So the activities can be anything from a few people getting together, having tea and cakes, and just maybe some debate cards and debating some current topics, right up to large-scale events where they have panel discussions, MPs. I should say that anyone who signs up to Parliament Week, when they do so, we notify their local MP to let them know that there's an activity happening in their constituency. So Parliament Week's a really great way to get to know your local MP, or even a member of the House of Lords, or somebody else who's in a position where they can help them make social change or change things in their community. So there are, in fact, activities happening in every constituency in the UK this year. Some constituencies have over 50 activities happening. It's absolutely amazing how people have embraced Parliament Week, and we find with schools that, in particular, that it's now part of the school calendar, and it happens every year in some schools, which is absolutely great, because we want people to feel confident about Parliament and the language that's used and the procedure. We want young people, very young people, to be able to feel confident that they understand it, and it is for them. That Parliament is for the people. This year we decided we don't have a theme each year, because we don't want to dictate to people what they want to change, whether it's in their school, whether it's in their local community, or globally. We don't want to dictate to people. But this year we did decide to have a tagline that was "Small actions lead to big change." And the reason we did that was because I think sometimes people feel that getting involved with UK Parliament means that you have to be very knowledgeable and that you have to do big things, when in fact, actually, all we want people to do is just do something, start small, just do something with a group of local people who perhaps have a lot in common, or have something in common that they would like to change. And that's where change starts. And it's important to us that when people take part in Parliament Week, that not only do they feel better informed about UK Parliament, but also that they feel empowered and confident, and that we equip them with the tools to actually do something about what they want to change in the world. Because we're so aware that there are people, out there in the UK that feel skeptical and disempowered, and we're aware of that, and that's why our team exists, to try and help people regain that confidence that they can have a say in what happens in UK Parliament. Please do check out the Parliament Week website. Like I say, there are lots of great online activities for all ages, and it's there all year round. So you don't just have to do it during Parliament Week. You can do something all year round. And I think I've covered everything there, but if anybody would like to ask any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Thanks. Do put them in the chat if you've got any questions, and we have a kind of a Q&A section later on, and we're happy to kind of answer those questions there. One thing I want to kind of ask Annie is what kind of positive changes do you think UK Parliament Week has had on the work of the House and kind of the work of the MPs and Lords, etc.? Because I know that a lot of the work you do is working with MPs and members of the House of Lords and members of staff actually as well.
You know, it's interesting because recently we had a bit of a restructure, and actually the public engagement department that we are, we used to be sort of isolated out on our own, but after this restructure, we've actually been moved into a department that works much more closely with the House of Commons chamber and MPs, but also the House of Lords. So we're actually working much more closely with members now, and some of the feedback that we have been receiving from MPs is that something like this, UK Parliament Week, it provides them with an opportunity to get to know their constituents better and to have those conversations about what's going on in their constituency, how they can get involved, how they can help. And going forward, obviously Parliament Week's just 1 week of the year, but going forward, we're going to be looking for more opportunities to help MPs and members of the House of Lords and other senior people in UK Parliament to engage with the public, so that there isn't that, so that public engagement isn't just something that's isolated and isn't properly part of the business of Parliament. It is now properly part of the business of Parliament. So I think it's been taken much more seriously now, and I think it's really exciting.
Great, and actually, there's a question in the chat box. I think I will bring in.
Okay.
Michelle Doyle-Wildman asks, are there also public engagement teams at the other parliaments, the devolved parliaments, that you work with as well? Absolutely,
yes, we do. And in fact, for Parliament Week, this year we decided to produce booklets for each of the nations that actually explained the relationship between the parliaments in the nations and UK Parliament, and we've had such amazing feedback, and actually we've had some good feedback from people who have already taken part in Parliament Week this week already, saying thanks so much for the specialist booklet for Scotland, because it's now helping us and our community better understand the relationship between the Scottish Parliament and UK Parliament. Yeah, and we, as I say, we do work closely with people who work in the other parliaments, because we're aware that there are subtle differences in language. There are, you know, for example, in Northern Ireland, there are some, you know, cultural differences, and there are some sensitivities, and so it's really important to us that we do work with those other parliaments. And also we do have outreach officers who work in Wales, work in Scotland, work in Northern Ireland. So we've got that localised, specialised knowledge. So we do take it really seriously, that relationship between ourselves and the other parliaments.
Thanks, that's really interesting. I know that, you know, we want to do more at the OU in future with UK Parliament Week, working with the nation. So that's good to know that. Thank you. Okay, we'll bring Annie back in later on to talk a little bit more. But I want to kind of just move on to talk about the actual Changemakers guide itself. Again, as I said, this is developed as part of UK Parliament Week. You were sent a link to the guide in the webinar invite, and you can also access it via our website, and I'll give you some more information on that later. So the Changemakers guide is a step-by-step guide to making change, kind of focused on kind of political and kind of social change. So from the initial stages of planning and research, to actually kind of getting your MP on board, or maybe a member of the House of Lords on board, creating a petition. We had an event early today just for OU politics students with Catherine McKinnell MP, chair of the Parliamentary Petitions Committee, and she explained about creating a parliamentary petition and how to do that and what the kind of pros and cons were. But we also talk about other ways of having an impact as well, such as through social media and other avenues. You know, we've just talked about the devolved parliament. We talk about that in the guide as well, working with your local council and all kinds of things. We're not saying it's all about Parliament, even though we are focused on that as part of UK Parliament Week. So really the guide builds on the values and the aims of the OU and UK Parliament Week, which coincide nicely, you know, with the aim of enabling students as well as the general public to be able to make a difference through learning about political and democratic engagement. So we try and offer inspiration to everyone, no matter how big or small the issue. As you know, many people have, you know, study politics will know, you know, change could be focused on different things. It can be focused on, you know, kind of the kind of outright political. So, you know, campaigning for a change of government or to change a particular policy. It can also be focused on the social, so changing how something works in society, such as the rights a group have. And obviously these things overlap. Some people here might be change makers already. Or you might have issues that you're interested in, and they could be really big issues, small issues, local issues, global issues, things which impact you personally, things which impact kind of wider society, things you think are fairly easily resolvable, or things where you don't actually know where to start. But we do hope this guide will give you a starting place. That's the aim. So we split the guide up into 4 separate stages, and step 1 we call getting started. And I think it's quite useful to kind of go through these to give a bit more kind of detail about the contents of the guide, because if you're going to be using it maybe with students or in your own life, it's kind of good to know that. By the way, I should say we're not expecting you to be able to read the contents of the guide. That's just a screenshot. Obviously, the main guide is available online, and you can kind of read it much more easily. But you know, hopefully by kind of going through these stages, you'll kind of understand the aim of the guide, why it's useful, and kind of how you can use it. But I want to hand over to Lilybell Evergreen now. Lilybell is an OU politics student, and she helped to create the Changemakers guide, and working with students as partners has been a really important part of this project. So I want to hand over to Lilybell now, who's just going to talk about stage 1, getting started.
Yes, so I'll cover some key points of stage 1, but you can always read more about it in the guide of the specific detail of each step. So firstly, when you want to make change, it's quite important to do your research on the topic you're passionate about. For example, there might be existing key campaigners and organisations, as well as existing methods of making change that have been successful in the past. It's important to be up to date with the news of the issue, as well as what others' viewpoints are. This can help you to make a stronger argument for making change, as you can anticipate objections and counter them with substantial evidence that you've already got in your back pocket. Another important aspect to getting started is to work out your specific aims. This includes developing clear objectives and a goal for what you'd like to achieve in your campaign. Narrowing down your aims to a specific issue makes it easier for others to engage in your activities, as it's clearer what you're trying to achieve. And of course, reaching out to others is really important part of making change. You might be able to join an existing campaign, like I said, or you might actually identify a niche where you can start your own campaign or initiative. Either way, working with others is going to be key, both to discuss ideas and, of course, because you can't make widespread change on your own. There's a few things to consider as well about when you're going to make change. For example, things like the timing. Too early and you might not have an impact, and too late and you might not be able to influence the kind of key trend going on. Also, it's important to think about mode. Some examples of communicating your issues are social media, writing a formal report, speaking at public meetings. Think about what you're already good at and what you already have skills in. It's often best to use multiple modes to engage different audiences, and this is the moment that if you've really thought about who you want to reach out to, that might help inform how you might communicate to them. And it's also important to think about the accessibility when you're thinking about communication. So, for instance, if you've made a podcast or video, you might want to provide subtitles or a transcript of a speech. Yeah, the guide covers other steps to getting started, which are really useful when planning your campaign. So check it out to begin thinking about some of these things in more detail. And remember, start small and you can always build towards bigger change.
Thanks, Isabel. That's a really good summary. I think that kind of one about kind of starting small is kind of really important. But another two that I think are really important, which you kind of covered, are identifying your target. And by that I mean kind of, who makes the change, who's in charge, who has the power. It might be more than one person or more than one group. I used to work for MPs, and people would often be confused about who the kind of change maker was. Was it the MP? Was it the councillor? Who do they actually need to contact to kind of get the change made? So kind of doing your research is a really important step. And I think also kind of knowing, kind of working out what your aims are, so what you're actually trying to achieve. I'm a big believer in achievable aims and achievable change. So kind of a smaller set of aims, or kind of one aim, is often a useful place to start, rather than kind of trying to change the world immediately. But there's much more detail on this in the guide itself, where you can kind of look at in much more detail about the kinds of things you need to consider. So we want to move on to stage 2 now, which we've called Find Inspiration. And again, I'm going to pass over to Lilybell now, who's going to talk about that stage.
Thanks. So in the guide, we highlight some of the change makers who've inspired both OU students and the wider public. And while some of these change makers undoubtedly already had fame or a platform to help making change from, that's obviously something that's not open to most of us. Still, they all demonstrate how small actions can lead to bigger change, especially by inspiring others to act, raising the profile of important issues, and hopefully making change on a larger scale politically. So one example I'll dive into, who's mentioned in the guide, is Greta Thunberg. Age 15, Greta began weekly demonstrations outside Swedish Parliament to raise awareness about the need for greater climate action. Her actions caught media attention and have since grown into a global youth movement, improving public awareness and prompting politicians to engage more with climate issues. Although her actions have been widely praised, she's also been highly scrutinised by the public, media organisations, and some politicians. Despite this, Greta's shown how effective peaceful protest and small actions can be, especially when they spread on a larger scale. A strength of her approach has been the fact that she targeted a specific issue and used scientific evidence to support her campaign, which are obviously things we've just mentioned to do with the guide. Over the past few years, her influence has grown, and she's now one of the most recognisable and influential activists in the world. Greta Thunberg is an inspiring change maker who shows that you don't need an existing platform or a complex strategy to make an impact. Thinking of change makers who inspire you can help you to model your campaign on their methods and to be inspired to persevere despite any difficulties you may face when making change.
Thank you. That's a really good summary and very apt, considering the events of this week. And she's on the front page of many newspapers as we speak. Some of the other people we talk about in the guide, you can see on screen, we have Marcus Rashford. Lots of people nominated him as a change maker, but we also have kind of people a bit more historical. Some people nominated Barbara Castle MP. For her kind of work and kind of creating change through Parliament, kind of in particular focusing on kind of employment law for women. She was a very popular nominee. Ian McKellen was another nominee, and we talk about him in the guide for the change he kind of created, working with other people as well, like Stonewall, through media activism and lobbying in the area of kind of gay rights. So I think all of these examples and more show that change isn't always quick, it isn't always easy. It can take a long time sometimes. Ian McKellen and Stonewall worked for decades to kind of get the change that they wanted to see. And you might have failures along the way as well. It might be kind of, one step forward, 2 steps back. But I think it's also important to note that in the guide, we don't just talk about kind of, famous people or kind of politicians. We talk about kind of community campaigners as well, and give some examples of inspiring, kind of ordinary change makers. all people actually who've won UK Parliament Week awards. So, for instance, we talk about Harrow Mencap. The members started a campaign and were successful in recruiting additional learning disability nurses. They had online petitions, they lobbied councillors, spoke with their MP, who then tabled an early day motion, etc. So a real example of change kind of from the ground up. And we also highlight the Apple Collective, kind of a network of individual people who, in response to COVID-19, launched a campaign around digital exclusion. So they had social media campaigns, they wrote to their MPs, and they were actually invited to speak at the all-party parliamentary group on universal credit. So we talk about kind of well-known people, but also less well-known people who have kind of created real change in their own community. But all of them are kind of really good examples as to how you can make change. And I think kind of just seeing kind of what worked, what didn't work. And we do talk in the guide as well about, the things which didn't work. Marcus Rashford, for example, his kind of earlier campaign, he wasn't particularly happy with. He didn't feel it had a very good reach, so he kind of changed his kind of tactics. So they're all examples of of the kind of things that we can do to try and make change through politics and also outside politics. Okay, so step 3 we call have an impact, and this is actually where a lot of the work happens. So this section describes how you can work with UK Parliament to make change in different ways. So voting is the obvious one. Raising your issue in Parliament via MPs and members of the House of Lords, so asking them to put a question to the House or hold a debate related to an issue. You can work with all-party parliamentary groups, so you can ask them to support your cause if it aligns with their agenda. You can submit evidence to a select committee. You can lobby your MP, and you can create a petition via the Parliamentary Petitions website. And obviously, a lot of those things you can do in the kind of the devolved parliaments as well, including the petition. But we also describe in this step the other ways you can lobby for change outside of Parliament or alongside Parliament. So, as I said, you can work with other parliaments and councils. You can kind of do media activism, whether it's kind of traditional media or kind of social media, peaceful protest. There's events in your local community. Change doesn't always have to be like on a big scale. It could be something you're trying to do in your local community. So kind of events in the community can be a really great way of doing that. Where I live, the village next to mine, they're trying to kind of build a big housing estate. Some people aren't happy, so they're currently kind of holding various events in the local community about that to try and kind of get a group of people together to try and stop it. So I think that's probably the most successful way they can do that. I don't think social media would be particularly apt in that case, but that kind of local community events would be much more appropriate. And there's many more ways as well we describe in the guide. But you need to work out what the best route for change is for your issue. And we also discuss in the guide, this is the kind of the blue bit on the right, we talk about the qualities you need to succeed. I'm not going to go through them, but I think one of the kind of the key ones we mention is the notion of resilience. So I think all of the campaigners we talk about in the guide are very resilient one way or the other, and kind of kept on going even with setbacks. And I think this is why I want to kind of bring Annie in from UK Parliament again, because Annie is going to talk in a bit more detail about the ways you can engage with UK Parliament to make change. So as Annie said, she's part of Parliament's engagement team, and she worked with us on the Changemakers guide. So over to you, Annie. You're on mute, Annie.
I know, I've just realised. Thank you, Donna. Yes, as I mentioned, I work on the public engagement team, and you may not be aware, but it's your democratic right to visit Parliament. And historically, people who wanted to create change and wanted to lobby their MP would come to Parliament and do just that. But we're aware now that people live all over the UK, and some people have limited ability to come all the way down to London to speak to their MP, and we live in a different age. So, our team, we have, as I mentioned earlier, we have people working all over the UK who can come and talk to a school or a community group about the work of Parliament. So people don't have to come all the way to London just to engage with us. A lot of what I'm about to tell you now is available on the UK Parliament website, and I would really recommend that you go and have a look on there, because we have a really amazing learning resources, films, games, you know, just interactive sort of resources online available to everyone that can help you better understand the work of UK Parliament. I mentioned earlier that anything that we do as a team, we don't want to just be about informing people. It's not just about educating people and telling people this is what happens in Parliament, this is what MPs do, this is what the House of Lords does. Of course, that's really important, and we do want people to be properly informed. But beyond that, we want to think that what we do as a team has an impact, and that in fact it leads to behavioural change in the individual, but also, you know, potentially, we're really ambitious, but to have societal change, that we're creating communities and societies that feel really empowered and confident to talk about politics and to get involved and to be the groups of people that make change. Some of the ways that we talk to people about that they can do to get involved and influence what happens in Parliament are, well, first thing you think of is your MP. They represent you in Parliament. Develop a relationship with your MP. It's not always easy. It's, you know, I'll be honest, MPs are incredibly busy, but it is genuinely very important for most MPs, if not all that I've met, that they have a good relationship with their constituents. They do genuinely want to make a difference in their constituency. But, you know, as I say, they're not always available. And we also encourage people to reach out to members of the House of Lords, who are there, many of whom have amazing expertise in particular areas and represent different regions. So I would encourage you, if you are interested in talking to somebody who works in Parliament, to go on the website and to go on Find My MP or Find Your MP, where you can find out a lot more information about individual MPs and also members of the House of Lords. Donna mentioned petitions. I find myself very often saying to people, I get frustrated with people who talk to me at length about things they're worried about, concerned, that, you know, why is it like that? I want to change that. And I call them sofa sitters, because the majority of those people are people sitting on the sofa with their friends, with their family, feeling disempowered, feeling like they can't do anything and that they don't have a relationship with UK Parliament. But actually there are things you can do, and one of those things is start a petition, and you can go on the UK Parliament website. There is a petition section on there, and those petitions are particularly effective if they achieve over, say, 100,000 signatures. It is then you know, taken forward and considered by the government and for a debate in Parliament. So it can be a really, you know, it's a small step, but potentially very effective way of getting a lot of people's voices heard. You don't, of course, have to go on the Parliament website. There are other websites that run, and they can also be effective in lobbying particular organisations that people are unhappy with, or, you know, things that perhaps aren't necessarily to be brought in front of government. Register to vote. It's always shocking to find out the number of people who don't vote. And I know that I won't say too much on this because I know this is Rachel's favourite subject, so I won't say too much on this, but you can't vote if you don't register. And, you know, you can't be a sofa sitter if you don't vote, in my opinion, because you've got to do something to get your voice heard. Select committees. Many people, and I mean a huge percentage of people, are unaware of select committees. They're unaware of the work of select committees, what they do. Again, I recommend you go on the UK Parliament website. There are some great films that explain what they're responsible for, who work. I mean, select committees are made up of members, but of both the House of Commons and the House of Lords. And they're another effective way of people being able to give evidence in it. You know, if there's an inquiry, there are very often online surveys that you can access via the UK Parliament website. Just another way of getting your voice, your experiences, and you know, providing them I'm trying to remember the word, but you know, for providing them to the select committee so that they're actually hearing from the general public. There's another newly formed team called the Chamber Engagement Team, and they have a close relationship with MPs. And again, an MP will contact the Chamber Engagement Team about a particular debate, a particular subject that they want to feel more knowledgeable about, more confident speaking about in the Chamber. And very often this means talking to different communities, talking to specific people with specific life experiences, so that they can hear people's lived experience stories. And again, this is a genuine, tangible way that people are engaging with what's happening in Parliament and getting their voices heard. I know people who recently have spoken to the Chamber Engagement Team and they were quoted in the House of Commons chamber. So there are real tangible ways that you can get involved. Watch Parliament TV. Sometimes it's quite quiet and it's not necessarily very exciting, but it's just a really great way to get a sense of what happens there. And it kind of makes it more real to just watch it on TV for a while and get, you know, I think it's a good first step to try and understand what Parliament's all about. And then, of course, the biggest thing we encourage people to do when they feel passionate, when they're being a sofa sitter, is start a campaign, talk to other people, get, you know, if you're passionate about something and you want to change it and you're unhappy and you're concerned, your voice alone is great. But you with 1,000 other people or even more potentially has so much power and has so much potential to actually drive change, because at the end of the day, Parliament is there to listen to the people. It's there for the people. And if there are enough people using their voices collectively on something that they feel really passionately about and want to change, Parliament will listen. Yeah, I think I'll leave it there, and if anybody wants to ask me any questions, I will attempt to answer.
Yep, thank you. And please do put anything in the chat you want to ask. We'll do our best to answer them. One thing I want to ask you actually, Annie, because I think kind of this links to kind of what you were saying at the start, your kind of your job, your role, in all the kind of all of what you do. What do you think could help UK Parliament work better in creating change, in helping other people to kind of lobby for change? Is there kind of one thing in particular you'd like to see happen, or perhaps one thing which has happened which you think has made a big difference?
Oh gosh, so many things. I think I have already mentioned that our team work more closely with the Chamber now. Did I mention that already? Yeah, I think that has a lot of potential for to join people up in Parliament, people in senior positions and members to understand public engagement. But I think the Restoration and Renewal programme that's going on at the moment, there's a lot of questions in our team. We're not just thinking about Parliament as a building, and we're thinking about Parliament as probably a more philosophical view of what Parliament is and what it does and how it can better engage with the public. So we're asking a lot of questions. We're having focus groups with people from different communities to better understand what they know about Parliament, what they don't know, what they would like to know, how they'd like to be communicated with about opportunities to get involved, how they can better understand what's going on. We're being quite outward looking about this, because I think it's very easy, and probably Parliament has for hundreds of years existed in a bubble, and I think it's time to kind of, we're in a digital age now. I think it's time to burst that bubble and to be really proactively outward looking and talking to people about how they can engage more with their Parliament. So I think it's really exciting that the Restoration and Renewal project, that although it's just about the building, that these questions are happening, these conversations are happening, and that we are talking to people outside of Parliament all over the UK about what UK Parliament can look like in the, you know, in 5 years' time, excuse me, in 5 years' time, 10 years' time, 25 years' time. Let's be ambitious. Let's start trying some exciting ideas.
No, that's really interesting. The idea of, you know, that the Renewal project, it's not just about the physical building, is it? It's a much more kind of deeper question about Parliament and how it works. And actually, it's a very good excuse to start thinking about that while that project is happening. Thank you, Annie. I'm just going to move on now. I want to bring in a campaigner case study as an example of how people can make change. Rachel Farrington's been sitting very patiently waiting for her bit. Rachel is from Voting Counts, and she's going to talk about what she did. Thank you, Rachel.
Hi, everyone. So I won't keep you for long, but I'm just going to tell you a bit about a campaign that I started to perhaps give you some inspiration for all the campaigns that you might want to start using this fantastic resource that the Open University have created. So I think the thing that really struck me the most from that resource that Lilybell went through was about doing your research. When I first started my campaign, my research was very simple. It was talking to my friends. And essentially, I was chatting to my friends one day when I was 17, I was in sixth form. There was an election coming up, and I was the only one out of my friendship group that was doing politics as an A-level. So I started to talk to them saying, you can vote now, what are your plans for the election? And they were all kind of, oh, well, I don't really know what I'm voting for or who I'm voting for. It all confuses me a bit. So I'm just not going to vote. And I couldn't believe this because I was so excited to turn 18 and get my chance to vote as a little bit of a politics nerd that I was like, right, I'm going to convince you to vote. Because they all had things they really cared about, whether it be kind of local things like their parks or their community centres, or whether it be national issues like the NHS. All of these things were political, but they weren't engaging with the actual election process to have their say on these issues. So I created a website called votingcounts.org.uk. And the aim of it is to help people understand elections, what they are, what they mean for you, and to encourage people to get engaged in them. So there is lots of fantastic organisations out there which campaign for people to register to vote. And this comes into the point about reaching out to networks that might be similar. I work a lot with those kind of organisations, but we come almost in the next step. So you're registered to vote, you've got an election coming up, but you don't know what you're voting for, you don't know who you're voting for, and you don't know how it affects you. So we're trying to answer those key questions you might have. So I work with people from across the political spectrum to make sure that all of the content on our website is completely has no party political bias. That's really important to us because we believe that people should make their own decisions, decide what's best for them. And we try to provide resources like breakdowns of the manifestos, information about what different MPs might believe, and also that information about how you can contact your local representatives or candidates to get to know them too. So we work a lot with different organisations. We work with volunteers as well around election time to kind of bring that content together. So it really is a combined effort, and that comes nicely back into the Changemaker guide, in that it's about building that support. And definitely on the creation side of things, I've had a lot of support, and it's been really fantastic over the last few years to build this campaign. And then in terms of how we got it out there, so this campaign was very much about creating a resource and then getting it out, this information that we'd collated, out to people so that they could access it, and it would then answer their questions. So I used social media. It was free and it was accessible, and I was able to talk to people from all over the country really quickly and easily. And through using social media, I then built up a following, and I was then started to be invited onto more traditional forms of media. So I've done BBC, ITV, I've done Channel 5, I've done lots of news radio, local news radio, talking about elections and trying to convince young people to go out and use their vote. So it's been a really real whirlwind campaign, but I wish I'd had a guide like the Open University Guide to kind of give me that hand holding for the first part, because it can be really challenging when you've been tweeting for weeks and you've got 3 followers and then suddenly it happens. And I think it is about kind of putting that time in, getting that support network, and really persisting, because it does take time. I was 17 when I set this up, and I'm now 25, and I'm very close to no longer being able to call myself a young voter myself. But because I was so passionate about this, I've persevered and met some fantastic people along the way, like Annie and Donna. So it's really fantastic to be here, and encourage you all to be the next generation of campaigners. So hope to see all your campaigns soon.
Thanks, Rachel. It's really inspiring. I guess I wish I had something like that when I was kind of young. Because again, I remember people talking, when I was, doing A levels or whatever, talking to people, and they just didn't think politics was part of their life, if that makes sense, even though they were interested in all these kind of political issues. So it sounds a fantastic resource, and I encourage people to kind of have a look on the website, to take a look themselves. Just want to ask you a couple of questions, if that's okay. What was the most difficult thing to creating change with your project?
I think it was getting the word out. It can be really demotivating when you're like plugging away and you're trying really hard, and then you're seeing other campaigns getting traction, and you're like, I just wish I'd have my breakthrough. And it did take a long time. The website was really basic for quite a few years, and then suddenly I taught myself how to do a better kind of website design, and slowly built it up, and now it looks a lot more professional. And yeah, that's all been a bit of a challenge, really, to kind of keep persisting with it, even when it's it's not getting the attention you wish it would because of the work you're putting in.
How important was working with other people to kind of set this up, or did you who did you work with, without kind of going into people's names, but were there particular kind of groups of people, or was it kind of more of a solo effort?
So it was a solo effort for the first couple of years, and then when I went to university after sixth form, a lot of my friends naturally just wanted to get involved. It was great kind of experience for them. So I would definitely shout out a lot of my friends at university. We all pitched in, and like I say, they were from across the political spectrum, and it was all about kind of, it doesn't matter who you're voting for, they just wanted to make sure people were voting, and I thought that was really nice. So definitely my friends, but also the kind of democratic community space, people who are getting people registered to vote, or UK Parliament Week, or all these kind of organisations, also really important, because we're not competitors. We all want the same thing. We want people to engage in our democratic process, but we're coming at it from different ways. I do a lot of it around kind of informing people and giving you a lot of text and a lot of information. Other people do it through video or innovative kind of events and those kind of things. So what works for one person might not work for another. So it's important we have all of these organisations trying to tackle it from different directions.
I've got one question now from Michelle. She says, what's your next campaign going to be?
Voting counters will always be my little baby. I think I'll still continue to do it, even though I'm a little bit older now. But I have a full-time job that I do, and I work in kind of political campaigns day to day. So I've got that to keep me busy. But this is something I do. I don't get paid for it. Voting counts is just my evenings and weekends, especially around election time. So I think it will always be that.
And I think actually it's a good example of how this kind of thing, let's face it, we all want to get ahead, and we all want to kind of do well. And this kind of thing actually is apart from kind of making change because we want to make change, it's actually something that can be really good for people's CVs, gaining work experience, gaining contacts, that kind of thing. So this kind of thing can have an impact on your own life in a more kind of instrumental manner, as well as kind of creating change for the greater good. And there's nothing wrong with that. I think we should kind of applaud that and welcome that, because it's a good thing to try and do that kind of thing. Thank you, Rachel. That's really inspiring. And again, I'd like to kind of encourage people to take a look at that website, because I think it's really fantastic. Okay, so if anyone has any questions, now's the chance to ask any. We have had people sending in questions. We have a kind of an internal forum, so kind of some kind of students and staff have left questions there, which I will bring in, and people have emailed me some questions as well. So I am going to kind of bring them in and kind of ask people some questions. I'm going to start actually, if it's okay, Lily Bell, just to kind of ask you a question. What do you think the most important quality a change maker needs is? You obviously worked on the guide, you kind of looked at all of this stuff and kind of contributed. Is there anything which to you stands out as being, you know, really important?
Yes, well, I think we've talked a lot about resilience throughout this, and that's one of the ones mentioned in the guide, and that was one of the ones you mentioned. And I think it's a really important quality. So I think, as Rachel was kind of saying, there's a lot of things you might need to learn along the way. There's a lot of times you might be sitting there wondering, how can I do something better? Why isn't someone I've contacted, why aren't they responding to me on this issue? And I think resilience is like the #1 thing when you're trying to make change. You might imagine it will take a shorter amount of time than it actually will, or something like that. And you've just got to kind of keep your focus and keep your resolve towards it.
No, I think so. I mean, even, you know, just kind of this Changemakers guide is itself, you know, we're trying to kind of create change of a kind through it. And believe me, I've found out, you know, you really do need to be resilient to keep a project going, because, you know, there's so many elements to it. And I work somewhere with a fantastic team of people, and it's still tough sometimes to kind of, you know, keep things going. So if you're kind of working on an individual level or in a small group level, I think it's, you know, even more difficult. But no, I definitely agree with you on the resilience. Rachel, you talked about social media, and someone sent a question in on the forum about social media. You talked about kind of, you know, using Twitter and trying to get traction, etc. Was social media the most important kind of way you gained that traction, or were there other things which were equally important or kind of even more important than social media in getting your campaign out there?
Social media for me was the most important because it was free, it was accessible, and it was easy to learn and use. I found it sometimes to be really useful. So kind of the last set of elections in May, we did loads on Instagram and got loads of pickup there. And it was a kind of social media outlet I hadn't really utilised before. So I'm still learning and I'm still using it in new ways. But it also opened doors. So having that following on social media, getting myself and the organisation known on social media, then opened the doors to kind of being invited onto TV and radio to then reach an even bigger audience. So I think it opens a lot of doors, and it's a lot more accessible than some of the other forms of media, which you really kind of need the in on, and you need to be able to sit there and write a lot of letters to a lot of journalists and get blanked a lot. So I would say it's a way of kind of establishing yourself as a known entity before trying those methods.
Thank you. Annie, obviously you're kind of based at Parliament, and you've talked about kind of your kind of role, but are there any kind of specific resources available from Parliament? That's one of the questions that people raised in the previous webinar. Is there anything you'd like to kind of point people to? Because a lot of people here will be teachers, educators, working with students and young people, etc. Is there anything in particular that, you know, they can kind of take on board, whether it's UK Parliament Week stuff or more general stuff?
Well, of course, my first answer would be UK Parliament Week, but actually that, you know, that's 1 week of the year. We have got hundreds of resources on the UK Parliament Week website, and it's great because you can put filters on, and you can filter by subject type, you can filter by theme, by if you're a teacher, you can filter by key stage. I would, yeah, and the resources, they can be films or PDF documents that you can print out, but also there is a service where you can order some of the resources to be mailed out to you, hard copy. Not all of them, but some of them. Gosh. If I was to talk about any in particular, I think we've got some really great films that explain, for example, things like select committees. What is a select committee? What is an APPG? How a law's made? Well, I was actually talking to you about one of my favourite resources just before we started, and it's a game, because there's also games on there. There's something for all ages, you know, something fun things for very young children, like up to, you know, quite serious things for students. But something I think would appeal to all ages is a game called MP for a Week. And basically you become an MP and then it throws all these things at you within the week. I did it and got really stressed. My blood pressure went through the roof. I just thought, oh my goodness, is that what, you know, and it actually gives you a really realistic sense of what it's like to be an MP. So I think it's important to remember that all the resources on there, that they're not all very serious, and you know, we take being accessible really seriously. And when I say accessible, I mean we are looking into the some of them are delivered with BSL translation, and we're looking into Easy Read so that people that use Easy Read to communicate, we're looking into get a lot of our resources translated into Easy Read. So we take that part of accessibility really seriously, but also we take seriously being intellectually accessible. And by that I mean that we use plain language, and that we don't use overcomplicated terms or archaic terms, and we try to simplify what's happening in UK Parliament, because we hear all the time from people that they find Parliament inaccessible because of the language that's used to explain things. So I really highly recommend that you all go and have a look at our resources and our website. There's something for everyone.
Yeah, and we link to all your resources, I think, in the guide. And something we've tried to do with the Changemakers guide is make it accessible and you know, kind of easy to read and easy to understand for people from kind of whatever background or kind of whatever kind of educational level, etc. But I think we are going to have to kind of be on our last slide now. We have a couple of minutes left. We have 4 stages in the guide. Stage 4, or step 4, is called Spread the Word. And I'd like to encourage everyone to do just that, actually. You can read the Changemakers guide. You can read more about UK Parliament Week. You can join the Political Studies Association, including if you're a student. If you're an OU politics student, you can join our OU Open Politics community. That's kind of for internal students only. But I know there are some students here, so please do take a look. You can also post on social media who your Changemaker is. We did this for UK Parliament Week 2020, but we'd love to hear your kind of more recent examples. We have an example on the screen, and you know, just going to say who's inspired you politically, democratically, socially. Can be a famous person, can be a politician, can be a local community person, can be a family member, and you know, use the hashtags UKPW and OU at UKPW so we can kind of find what those inspirations are. And there's more on that in the Changemakers guide itself. I'd like to thank Annie Waddington from UK Parliament for helping with the webinar, as well as our OU politics student Lilybell Evergreen and Rachel Farrington from Voting Counts. I'd also like to thank the Political Studies Association for funding some of our work, and my colleagues from the OU for helping to set this event up and run it tonight. So thank you for attending. This is being recorded. We will put it on the website and put it on social media. If you have any questions, please send us a tweet. I'm sorry I didn't get through all the kind of questions people emailed me and put on the internal forum. So if there's any you haven't had answered, you want answered, please put it on Twitter or email us and we'll do our best to answer it. But thank you very much for coming.